Chapter 15. Colleen, stop it, Dougal said. Let her go now. The ferocity of his revulsion stunned him, but he could not deny it. He'd seen the Sylvari use her magics to animate corpses before, but not with somebody so freshly dead, and not with a fallen member of the Ebon Vanguard. Colleen's brow crinkled with concern. What is it? She said, examining the walking corpse. Are her eyes falling out or something? I miss things like that sometimes. Colleen's sincerity nearly deflated Dougal's anger. When he spoke again, he struggled to keep his words measured and his tone even. Colleen, he said, could you please let that woman rest in peace? Why? Don't you think she'll make a good... Oh, the Sylvari clasped her hand on her forehead. When she pulled it away, regret twisted her face into a rueful frown. I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about how it might offend you. That's all right, Dougal finally said. Just let her go. No, said Cranks. He raced forward, peering up at the walking corpse from below. Don't do that. She's perfect just the way she is. Dougal's right, said Riona, who looked just as distressed as Dougal felt. This is beyond the pale. The guardswoman was just trying to do her job. And we were doing ours, said Cranks. There's a good chance that the sewage tunnel exit is trapped, and we could use a walking test case to send in first to check things out. That's exactly what I was thinking, said Colleen, obviously pleased that somebody understood that she had only the best intentions. Trapped? Dougal glared at Cranks. And why didn't you mention that before? Cranks shrugged. I didn't want to complicate the matter with other issues. I figured the collective you here, would have a hard enough time making the right choice about how to get to Ascalon City from here without having to sift through extraneous data points. Wolf's breath, said Gulick. We've been wading through these rivers of sludge to reach a tunnel of traps? Some of us have, said Cranks. Others have remained nice and clean. Maybe too clean, said Ember. You didn't dirty your hands in that fight, did you? Cranks cringed at the accusation. I was trying to get a surprise for our foes out of my pack. But the rest of you made such quick work of them, I never had the chance. Sure, said Ember. Lucky you. Cranks bristled at her words. The next time I pull something from my pack, just remember this. Close your eyes. By the time you pull something out of your pack, we will all be dead, muttered the Char. Dougal returned to Colleen. Just let the woman go. When, Riona said in a voice thick and raw. I know her. I knew her. Her name was Wynn. Her father was friends with my father when we were young. He ran the armorer's shop. Dougal couldn't look at the woman anymore. He had to turn away. She's dead, said Ember, but she may still be of some use. That seems like a good way to honor her life. Char or not, Dougal said. That's the coldest rationalization I've ever heard. Bear's blood, said Gulick. I've never heard a pack of warriors natter on like a gaggle of old women squabbling over their weaving. The Norn turned to Colleen. Next time, show some more respect to those you kill. Every one of them was someone's child once. I wasn't, the Sylvari said. Gulick waved off her point. You know what I mean. To Dougal, the Norn said, the deed is done. Rather than fight over it, let's make some use of it. Or would you prefer one of us wind up sharing that woman's fate? Dougal groaned and looked at Wynn once more. Blood covered her from head to her knees, to which she'd fallen after Ember had delivered the killing blow. Her mangled face was recognizable, but only just. All right, he said, shaking his head as he spoke. Put it in the front. Then we don't have to look at her face. What about the rest of them? Riona said. Do we just leave them like this? To be eaten by the rats? Dougal gave her a pained shrug. He shared her anguish, but he didn't see what they could do to fix it. We can't burn them down here, and we can't bury them in the stone. Someone will come looking for them soon enough, he grimaced. We need to be as far away from here as we can by then, if only so we aren't forced to thin the vanguard numbers even more. Colleen put the shambling dead Wynn in the lead. The Sylvari followed right after her, with Cranks on her heels. Riona trailed after them, and Dougal remained in the back of the line of people who could fit into the walkway. Trudging through the stream, Ember and then Gulick swept along behind the rest of them. They made their way through the last section of the sewer, which seemed to wind on forever. Dougal kept peering into the darkness, hoping to see the faintest glow of light. The first clue that he had that they were near an exit was the way the walls of the tunnel seemed to vibrate in a tone lower than his ears could hear. He could feel it in the air, though, and eventually through the soles of his boots. The silent thrumming slowly grew in a pitch and volume until it became a dull roar. This, Dougal knew, must be the sound of the stream spilling out of the tunnel and tumbling down onto the mountainside beyond. We should be coming up on it soon, Cranks said. Dougal detected a hint of worry in the Azur's voice. You don't know? Haven't you been here before? Asked Riona. Of course not, said Cranks. Don't you know how dangerous this is? I've studied the maps many times, though. Dougal did not find that reassuring. He was about to say something about it when Wynn disappeared. The walkway in front of them had been tilted under their weight, pitching forward. It had thrown Wynn into the fast-moving waters. She floundered about at the surface for a moment, flapping her dead arms in some horrible mockery of an attempt to swim, and then disappeared beneath the surface. Colleen screamed as she nearly toppled in after her undead servant. When the walkway tipped downward, she lost her balance and spun her arms in a vain attempt to recover it. Moving faster than Dougal had thought he could, Cranks leaned forward, bending at the waist, and tapped Colleen on the shoulder with a hook attached to his back. Colleen managed to snag the hook with her hand, but instead of the hook hauling her back, her weight pulled Cranks forward, dragging him along to share her fate. However, this gave Dougal enough time to react, and he pushed past Riona to snag the Azura by the top of his pack. For a moment, he thought he might tumble in after the others, and the trap would manage to kill all three of them at once. But he dug in his heels and leaned back hard, bringing their forward progress to a halt. With Riona's help, he yanked both Cranks and Colleen back to a solid part of the walkway, where they all collapsed in a heap. The bottom of the stream must drop off ahead too, said Ember. I could feel the undertow from here. Thanks for saying something before it became a problem, Riona said as she struggled to catch her breath. Dougal checked to make sure the others were all right, then knelt down to examine the floor to see what had happened. Cranks stood next to him, giving him plenty of light to work with. There was a hinge on the floor, almost impossible to see, especially by the lantern's light. Dougal recognized the type of trap they had triggered, and he cursed. Bear's breath. What's wrong now? Golik asked. This filth is too cold to stand here in it. Lots of traps only work once, Dougal said. This one resets itself automatically. From this hinge here onward, the walkway is actually a ramp. A set of counterweights underneath it holds it up horizontally right up until there's enough weight on the end of the ramp. Then the ramp tips forward and dumps you right into the worst part of the sludge. And then you die, said Ember. Dougal shook his head. And then you find yourself trapped against a grating that covers the end of the tunnel, held up against it by the force of thousands of pounds of filthy water pressing you into it until you drown. And then you die, said Colleen. Dougal nodded. And then you're held there until your body rots enough for the water pressure to tear you into pieces small enough so that way you flow through the grate with the rest of Ebonhawk's waste. Dougal pointed at Crank's glowing light. Can you put that out? Cranks pulled a heavy sack from his backpack and hooded the stone with it, locking its glow. Dougal stared ahead into the darkness until his eyes adjusted to it. Yes, he said. I could see some light up ahead. I think we're near the entrance. Good, said Riona. Now we just need to figure out how to get there without dying. Dougal glanced around and his eyes fell on Golik. He pointed at the Norn's axe and said, Give me that. You're as mad as Raven, said Golik. No warrior gives up his weapon until the fight is finished. I'm going to use it to fight the trap. Dougal put out his hands. Trust me. Golik screwed up his lips as he evaluated the man and the moment, and then reversed his axe and handed it to Dougal by the handle. I expect it back in one piece. Holding the weapon, Dougal realized how heavy the thing was. He wasn't sure he could swing it over his head. Fortunately, he didn't have to. He set the axe down on the walkway and lowered himself into the sludge. It was just as nasty as it had been before. No matter how much he braced himself for the stench and the cold, it was horrible. He took the axe and put it headfirst into the sludge before Golik could stop him. Then he bent down deeper into the sludge until it came up to the tops of his shoulders. With a bit of wiggling, he managed to wedge the axe under the ramp. He tested it for a moment and then let it go. It was jammed in there hard enough that it was stuck. I want my axe back, Golik said. I haven't lost a weapon since an ice brute I was fighting took my spear from me and used it as a toothpick. I just need to release the grating, said Dougal. Then you can have it back. He climbed out of the muck again and then beckoned Cranks to come with him. I need your lamp, he said, and you're light enough not to trigger the trap with me. He looked past the Azura. The rest of you stay here. We'll be right back. Dougal worked his way forward along the ramp on his hands and knees, waiting for the axe's handle to snap or to feel the telltale tipping sensation that meant his life would soon end. As he drew closer to the end of the ramp, he saw the outside. The sewer exited the mountainside beneath a rocky overhang, which is why they could not see any daylight sooner. Even so, the light seemed muted, and Dougal guessed that the valley beyond the grate was probably still deep in shadow. The end of the sewer was sealed with an iron grate that was coated with rust and slime over the past 2 centuries. The water surged through the grate, forming a cascade of muck that disappeared in a fog below. The grate swung outward, but there was a lock on the grate that functioned only from this side, and it looked serviceable enough. With Crank's light over his shoulder, Dougal crept forward until he could reach the grate and put his weight on it instead. It held as steady as the rocks in which it was anchored. He slipped his pouch of lockpicks out of his pocket in his jacket and went to work. Because of the rust and filth, it took him over half a minute longer than it should have to force the lock to give, but it did. The grate, however, was stuck. Dougal smacked it with his hand, but that didn't do a thing. He tried a shoulder. That only bruised his arm. Standing up, he charged right at it. It gave. Suddenly, and too well. As the grate swung wide, Dougal lost his footing on the wobbly ramp and pitched forward. Cranks reached for him with the hook, but missed. Unable to recover his balance, Dougal did the only thing he could think of. He kicked off from the ramp and stretched out into the gaping maw of the fog and shadow before him. His fingers closed on the slimy, slippery bars of the grate as it swung away from him, and he clung to them for his life. He glanced down below his dangling feet and saw that he hung over a dizzying drop that deposited Ebonhawk's sewage into a cluster of jagged rocks. Despite himself, he shouted in terror, sure that he would not be able to maintain his tenuous grip on the treacherous grate. "Hold on," Riona said. He could not turn to see what she and the others were doing, but he hoped that it involved saving his life, and soon. A moment later, he heard Crank's voice saying, "What? Wait, no." The Azure came sailing past Dougal's head and straight over the grate. A rope attached to his waist drew taut, and someone on the other end of it held it fast so Cranks did not tumble to his death. Then, that same someone yanked on the rope to bring Cranks closer. Once Cranks had the grate in his grip, Dougal glanced back to see both Ember and Golek held the far end of the rope and were pulling hard. The grate swung shut with a satisfying clang, and the flowing sewage pushed the lower half of Dougal's body hard up against it. He used this opportunity to find a foothold and then haul himself up out of the flowage. "Thanks," Dougal shouted backward. "Hey, what about me?" Cranks shouted from the other side of the grate. "What can you see, Cranks?" Dougal asked. "That I'm about to die." "No, I mean below you. Is there any way to get down from here?" "Sure, lots. That doesn't involve dying." "That narrows it down quite a bit. Hold on." Crank swung himself around on the end of the rope and craned his neck at all angles. Hard to see through all the mist. Looks like a fairly sheer drop, about 50 feet or more. The Azura rummaged around in his pack and produced another coil of rope. He tied one end securely to the grate and let the other end play out below him. Dougal worked his way over to where the lock stood. "Let out the rope," he said to Golek and Ember. "Slowly." They did, and the pressure from the flowing sewage pushed the grate open on its hinges again. Once the gap was wide enough, Dougal swung himself around to the other side of the grate and grabbed onto the rope. "Why didn't you get started down?" he asked Cranks. "Slide down on a filth-slick rope into a monster-infested wilderness?" The Azure shook his head. "You go first." Dougal motioned for Ember and Golek to let the rope play out until the grate swung back far enough that it was no longer hung over the sewage-coated rocks below. Then they stuck one leg out and wrapped the rope around it. He checked Crank's knot and found it solid, then lowered himself down. The going was easy at first, until he got to the section of rope that had dangled into the flowage. It was slick and nasty. Dougal had already been covered with so much filth that he didn't care much about the stench, but he had to hold on to it with all his might to keep from sliding down too fast. This soon proved impossible. No matter how he tried to clamp his hands on the rope, it was too slippery, and down he went in a barely controlled slide. Dougal hit the ground hard, his legs buckling underneath him. He rolled with the impact. He lost his grip on the rope and feared for a moment that he would tumble back into the pool at the base of the falls or into a deep crevasse hidden in the darkness. He came to a stop, though, against a wall of jagged boulders instead. The Char warband that had been waiting there burst out from behind the rocks and surrounded him in an instant.